My son, my only child, told me our family dinner was canceled. He said he needed money, that his wife had a medical emergency, so I sold a piece of my soul to help him. But then I found him at the most expensive steakhouse in town, laughing with his wife's family as they feasted on my money. They thought I was just a naive old man, an open wallet they could drain anytime they wanted. They were wrong. I made one phone call that night, and I served them a dish of revenge so cold it would freeze their fraudulent lives solid. Before I tell you how this all went down, how I turned their whole world upside down, I'd love to know where you're all listening from. Drop your city, your state, or your country in the comments, and let me know what time it is for you. It makes this big world feel a little smaller, knowing we're sharing this story together. Okay, let's get into it. My day starts at 5:30 a.m., not because an alarm clock screams at me, but because 65 years of habit are etched into my bones. For 40 of those years, that was the time the shift started down at the Ford assembly plant in Wayne. The smell of strong coffee, hot metal, and ozone, the deafening roar of the machinery. That was the symphony of my life, the rhythm I moved to. Now, the only sound in my small bungalow in Oak Haven, Michigan, is the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the groan of the floorboards as I make my way to the kitchen. My wife, Carol, has been gone 3 years now. Cancer. It was a thief in the night, fast and cruel, and it took the music out of this house, leaving behind a silence that's heavier and more oppressive than any engine block I ever lifted. This house is the only one I've ever owned. We bought it in '79, a little starter home with a big backyard and an even bigger garage. We raised our son, Kevin, in these rooms. Every scuff on the hardwood in the hallway marks a time he raced his toy cars too fast. Every patched up hole in the drywall is a ghost of a stray baseball. After my coffee, black and strong enough to dissolve a spoon, I always end up in the garage. It's my sanctuary, my church. It still smells faintly of gasoline, motor oil, and sawdust, a scent that's more comforting to me than any fancy cologne. My tools are all neatly arranged, hung on a massive pegboard that covers an entire wall, just the way I like them. Polished, oiled, ready. But lately, they don't see much use. My hands, gnarled and scarred from a lifetime of work, feel restless without a task. My pride and joy sits under a dusty gray canvas cover in the center of the garage, a 1968 Ford Mustang, cherry red. Carol and I bought it for a song back when we were young and full of foolish dreams, a rusted-out shell we towed home on a prayer. It was our project. Over the years, I rebuilt the 289 V8 engine, piece by painstaking piece. When Kevin was a boy, he'd sit on a wooden stool beside me, his eyes wide with wonder, handing me wrenches and asking a million questions. His hands, small and clean, next to mine, calloused and permanently stained with grease. "One day, Dad," he used to say, his voice full of childhood certainty, "we'll get her on the road together. We'll cruise all the way to California, just like in the movies." He's 42 now. A big shot marketing executive for some tech company downtown. He doesn't have grease under his fingernails anymore. He has a fancy Swiss watch and Italian leather shoes that cost more than my first car. Our relationship, it's complicated. It's not that he's mean or disrespectful. It's more of a quiet, polite distance, a chasm that opened and grew wider with every promotion he got. He went off to the University of Michigan, the first in our family to even think about college, and came back a different person. He moved to the city, met Tiffany, and stepped into a world of corporate ladders and networking events. A world where a retired auto mechanic from Oak Haven didn't quite fit. He never said it, but I could feel it in the way he'd subtly correct my grammar, the way Tiffany would give a tight little smile when I told a story from my days on the assembly line. They lived in a world of brunch reservations and quarterly reports. I lived in a world of oil changes and memories. I pull the cover off the Mustang. The chrome glints in the weak morning light filtering through the grimy window. It needs a new carburetor and the upholstery is cracked like an old baseball glove, but she's beautiful. She was our dream, Kevin's and mine. But dreams, I've learned, have a way of rusting away if you don't tend to them. I'd spend hours in that garage surrounded by ghosts of laughter and engine grease. I thought those memories were all I had left, but I had no idea how much more I was about to lose. Leaving the garage and the ghosts within it, I saw Mrs. Gable from next door wrestling with her lawnmower in her front yard. Eleanor Gable is 86, a widow like me, and as stubborn as a lug nut that's been rusted on for 20 years. She's lived in that house since before I moved in, a fixture of the neighborhood, as reliable as the mailman. "Morning, Eleanor," I called out, wiping my hands on a rag as I walked over. "It looks like you're having a bit of a tussle with that old Briggs and Stratton." She looked up, pushing a stray white curl from her forehead with the back of a dirt-smudged gardening glove. "Oh, Arthur, this blasted thing. It started, sputtered at me like it was offended, and then just gave up the ghost. I think it's finally had enough of my lawn." "There's no such thing as had enough, just needs a little convincing," I said with a smile. It felt good to have a problem I could diagnose and solve, a straightforward mechanical issue with no messy emotions involved. "Let me take a look." She gratefully stepped aside. It was an old pushmower, but a good one. I checked the fuel, then the air filter. Finally, I pulled the spark plug. It was fouled, black with carbon. A simple fix. I took it back to my garage, cleaned it on the wire wheel, adjusted the gap, and screwed it back in. A couple of pulls later, the mower roared back to life with a puff of blue smoke. Eleanor clapped her hands together. "You're a magician, Arthur, a lifesaver. Come on, you're not getting away without a cup of tea. I just baked a batch of my lemon poppy seed cookies." Sitting in her neat little kitchen, which always smelled of cinnamon, Murphy oil soap, and something sweet baking, felt like stepping back in time. Her house was filled with doilies and old photographs in silver frames. We talked about our gardens, her prize-winning roses versus my stubborn tomato plants, about the changing weather, and about the good old days when the neighborhood kids played kick the can in the street until the fireflies came out. "How's your Kevin doing?" she asked, her eyes kind and wrinkled at the corners. "I haven't seen his car around here in ages. I miss seeing him." A familiar ache settled in my chest, a dull weight I was constantly carrying. "He's good. Real busy with work. You know how it is," I said, forcing a smile that felt like a cheap plastic mask. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. The truth was, I hadn't seen his car here in 6 months. The last time he visited, it was for 20 minutes on his way to a client meeting on a Saturday. He'd stood in the doorway, checking his phone the whole time, his foot already halfway out the door. "He was always such a wonderful boy," Eleanor reminisced, a fond look in her eyes. "I'll never forget the time my George was trying to build that little shed in the backyard. George was terrible with his hands, bless his heart. Kevin, he must have been all of 12, came right over without being asked. He spent the whole weekend helping George, making sure the walls were square and the roof was level. George always said that boy had a good heart and a level head." I remembered that weekend. I remembered the immense pride I felt watching my son learn how to use his hands, how to help a neighbor without expecting anything in return. Where did that boy go? Was he still buried somewhere under the expensive suits and the strained corporate smiles? Sometimes I wondered if his wife, Tiffany, had changed him. She was polished, ambitious. The one time she came to the house for dinner, I saw her subtly wipe her fork with a napkin before eating my wife's meatloaf recipe. She never said a word, but her message was as clear as a freshly cleaned window. This place, my home, wasn't up to her standards. And, by extension, neither was I. "You must be so proud of all his success," Eleanor said, pulling me from my thoughts. "I am, and it was the honest truth. I was proud. I'd worked double shifts and greasy weekends so he could have the education I never did. I wanted him to have a better life, a life where his back didn't ache and his hands weren't permanently stained with the ghosts of 1,000 repairs. But I never imagined that better life wouldn't have room for me in it." Leaving Mrs. Gable's house, I felt a warmth that had been missing for years. It was the simple feeling of being useful, of being seen,
of connecting with someone who remembered the same good old days. But as I walked the 20 yards back to my empty home, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a name I hadn't seen flash on that screen in weeks. Kevin. The warmth vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, familiar dread. Dad?
I put down the phone, my heart feeling like a stripped gear in a busted transmission. I agreed to sell a piece of my soul for what I thought was a family emergency. And I have to ask you, what would you have done? Would you have seen the red flags I so desperately wanted to ignore? Let me know in the comments below. I really want to read what you think. I never should have believed him, and the real reason he wanted that money was more sickening than I could ever comprehend. 2 days later, a long, sleek flatbed truck, the kind you see hauling exotic sports cars, pulled up in front of my house. A slick-looking man in a tailored suit who didn't look like he'd ever had a spot of grease on his hands in his life got out. He was the collector Kevin had mentioned. He walked around the Mustang, barely glancing at the engine I had poured my heart into, and then handed me a cashier's check with a brisk, impersonal nod. I watched as they winched my car, my dream, onto the back of the truck. Watching it go felt like watching a funeral procession for my own past. The empty space it left in the garage was a physical ache, a gaping wound. I went straight to the bank, deposited the check, and transferred the full amount to Kevin's account. The number was so large it made my hand tremble as I filled out the slip. A few hours later, my phone buzzed. It was a one-line text from Kevin. "Got it. Thanks, Dad. You are a lifesaver." Not a phone call. Not another word about Tiffany's health or how she was recovering. The silence that followed was deafening and heavy with unspoken things. The garage felt hollow now. I couldn't bring myself to go in there for days. The empty space in the middle seemed to mock me. A few days after that, needing to get out of the house before the four walls drove me mad, I drove my old pickup truck into town to get some new belts and hoses. It's a '97 Ford F-150, rusty but reliable, my daily workhorse. My hands needed something to fix. My mind desperately needed a distraction from the loop of doubt and worry. At O'Reilly's Auto Parts, I was standing in the aisle comparing 2 different brands of serpentine belts when a familiar voice boomed from behind me. "Art Miller, I'll be damned! I thought they put you out to pasture years ago." I turned to see Dave Hartzell, a guy I'd worked with on the line for 20 years before he retired a year before me. He was a good man, a straight shooter with a laugh that could be heard over the roar of the factory floor. We shook hands, the grip familiar and strong. "Dave, good to see you. How's retirement treating you?" "Can't complain. The wife's got me busy with a honey-do list a mile long," he chuckled. "Hey, I saw your boy the other day. Man, he's really moving up in the world. Good for him." "Oh yeah?" I said, trying to sound casual, my heart giving a little flutter of interest. "Yeah, day before yesterday. Saw him over by the new corporate park on the north side of town. He was pulling out of the parking lot in a brand new BMW, a real beauty. Dark metallic blue, sleek as a panther. Must have set him back a pretty penny. I gave him a wave, but I don't think he saw me." My blood ran cold. A new BMW? 2 days ago? The very same day the money for the Mustang had cleared in Kevin's account? It couldn't be. It had to be a coincidence. A company car, maybe. That had to be it. "A BMW. Huh. Good for him," I managed to say, my voice sounding distant and strange to my own ears. We chatted for a few more minutes about old times and aching backs, but my mind was elsewhere, stuck on the image of a dark blue BMW. I paid for my parts and walked out into the parking lot, feeling dazed and unsteady. On my way home, I decided to stop by the Oak Haven Diner for a cup of coffee to try and clear my head. As I was walking in, I almost bumped right into my best friend, Frank Rizzo. Frank and I go way back. We played high school football together. He was the tough-as-nails linebacker. I was the reliable offensive lineman. He was the best man in my wedding. He'd gone on to be a detective with the Oak Haven PD, a damn good one, before retiring and opening up his own small private investigation firm. He specialized in things like insurance fraud and background checks. He had a nose for lies that was second to none. "Hey, Art, you look like you've seen a ghost," he said, his sharp eyes taking in my pale face as he slid into the booth across from me. I
couldn't hold it in. The words just spilled out. I told him everything. The canceled dinner, the sudden vague medical emergency, the desperate plea for money, selling the Mustang, and then what Dave had just told me about the brand new BMW. Frank listened patiently, stirring his coffee, his keen detective's eyes never leaving my face. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, my voice cracking on the last few words, he was silent for a long moment. He just shook his head slowly, a look of profound sadness on his face. He didn't say, "I told you so," though he'd warned me for years that Kevin was taking advantage of my good nature. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes said it all. He just clapped me on the shoulder, his touch firm and grounding. "Art," he said, his voice low and serious, "be careful. Something here stinks to high heaven." His words echoed in my mind all the way home. What did his detective's gut see that my father's heart was so desperately refusing to admit? That night, sleep wouldn't come. There was a stranger I couldn't welcome. I tossed and turned in the big, empty bed that Carol and I had shared for 40 years, the sheets feeling cold and unfamiliar. The conversation with Frank and Dave played on a relentless loop in my head. A new BMW, a canceled dinner, a sudden emergency. The pieces were all there on the table, scattered and sharp-edged, but they formed a picture so ugly, so monstrous, that my mind recoiled from it. Could my own son, my flesh and blood, the boy I taught to ride a bike and bait a hook, lie to me so monstrously? Could he sell our shared memories, the physical embodiment of our bond, just to buy himself a luxury car? It felt impossible. It felt like a betrayal of everything I had ever stood for, everything I had ever tried to teach him. The next day, I tried to keep busy. I replaced the belts and hoses on my truck, my hands going through the familiar motions, but my mind was 1,000 miles away. Every time the phone rang, my heart leapt into my throat, hoping it was Kevin, calling to explain everything, to tell me it was all a big misunderstanding. But he never called. Around noon, I couldn't stand it anymore. I sent him a text. "Just checking in. Hope Tiffany is feeling better." An hour later, a reply came back. "She's fine. Resting. Thanks." That was it. So cold, so dismissive.
The final, crushing blow came that evening. Friday. I was trying to lose myself in an old John Wayne movie when the phone rang. It was Dave Hartzell again. "Art, Dave here. Sorry to bother you at home again, man, but something weird just happened and I really thought you should know," he said, his voice hesitant, almost apologetic. "What is it, Dave?" I asked, my stomach tightening into a cold, hard knot. "Well, the wife and I decided to go out for our anniversary. We're downtown, walking past that new fancy steakhouse, the Gilded Steer." My heart started pounding against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of dread. I knew what was coming before he even said it. And I look in the window, and I swear to you, Art, I see your Kevin. He's sitting at a big table with Tiffany and an older couple, must be her parents. They're all laughing, raising their wine glasses, having a big old time. Tiffany looks perfectly healthy to me. They looked like they were having the time of their lives. The phone felt slick and heavy in my hand. The room started to spin, the walls seeming to close in on me. The dinner that was supposedly canceled because the restaurant had messed up. There he was, celebrating, while I was at home mourning the loss of my car, my dream, and worrying about my daughter-in-law's non-existent health crisis. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it, the depth of the deception knocked the wind out of me. It wasn't just a lie, it was a performance. A well-rehearsed play in which I was the unwitting and unwilling financial backer. You're sure it was him?" I asked, my voice cracking, clinging to one last, desperate shred of hope that it was all a mistake. "Positive, Art. Clear as day. I wouldn't call you if I wasn't 100% certain. After what you told me, it didn't sit right with me. A man shouldn't be treated like that by his own kid."
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate the call, I mumbled, my throat thick. I hung up the phone before he could hear the tremor in my voice. It fell from my hand and clattered onto the hardwood floor. It wasn't about a canceled dinner. It wasn't about a medical emergency. It was all a lie, a carefully constructed fiction designed for one purpose, to separate me from my money. It was about a new BMW, about expensive steak dinners, and about a life so luxurious that his own father was nothing but an obstacle, a resource to be tapped and then callously discarded. I stood there in the middle of my living room, the cheerful, heroic voices from the TV a mocking soundtrack to my personal tragedy. A white-hot rage, an emotion I hadn't felt with this intensity in decades, began to burn through the shock and the pain. It was a clean, purifying anger. He had played me for a fool. He had used my love for him as a weapon against me. He had taken my most cherished memory and melted it down to pay for his own selfish pleasures. I picked up the phone and dialed his number. Straight to voicemail. Of course. Kevin, it's your father. Call me. Now. I waited. An hour passed. Nothing. I called again. Voicemail. The coward! He was screening my calls. He had what he wanted, and now he was hiding, hoping I'd just fade back into the background of his life. And I realized, standing alone in the deafening silence of my home, that a phone call wasn't going to be enough. I had to see the full extent of this betrayal with my own two eyes. Saturday night. The night our family dinner was supposed to happen. The night I was supposed to be sitting across from my son, making awkward small talk with his wife and his parents. Instead, I was on a mission, a grim, heartbreaking mission. I showered, shaved with a surgeon's precision, and put on the best clothes I owned, a pair of dark gray slacks, a freshly ironed white button-down shirt, and the navy blue blazer I'd bought for Carol's funeral. It felt a little big on me now. I'd lost weight in the last few years. Or maybe I was just shrinking, diminished by grief and disappointment. I drove my old F-150 into downtown Oak Haven. The city was alive with the vibrant energy of a Saturday night. Lights glittered, music spilled out from open doorways, and people, so many people, were out enjoying themselves. Couples walked hand in hand, groups of friends laughed on their way to bars and restaurants. It all felt like a movie being projected onto a screen, and I was just a ghost watching from the darkness, completely disconnected from the joy around me. I found a parking spot across the street from the Gilded Steer, in the deep shadows of an old bank building that had been closed for years. From there, I had a perfect, unobstructed view. I felt like a private eye in a cheap detective novel, sitting in my beat-up truck on a stakeout, waiting to catch a liar. The difference was the liar was my own son, and the case was my own broken heart. At 7:05 p.m. sharp, a sleek, dark blue BMW M5 pulled up to the valet stand. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, painful rhythm. It was the car Dave had described. The valet, a young man in a sharp red jacket, rushed to open the driver's side door. Kevin got out. He was wearing a tailored dark suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment used to be. He smoothed his already perfect hair, then walked around to open the passenger door for Tiffany. She emerged, like a queen stepping out of a carriage, wearing a slinky black dress and heels that made her tower over him. They stood there for a moment under the warm glow of the restaurant sign, laughing at something he said. They looked so perfect. A power couple. The very picture of modern success. A moment later, a black Lexus sedan pulled up behind them. The older couple from Frank's description got out. A man with immaculately coiffed silver hair and a woman dripping in pearls and quiet condescension. Tiffany's parents, Preston and Vanessa. I'd only met them twice, at the wedding and at Carol's funeral. Both times, they'd looked at me with a kind of detached curiosity, like I was an interesting but slightly dusty antique they'd found in the attic. The four of them greeted each other with a flurry of air kisses and broad, phony smiles. They chatted for a moment. On the sidewalk, a perfect tableau of wealth and privilege. Then, led by Kevin, they swept into the restaurant as if they owned the place. The valet got into the BMW, the car my Mustang had paid for, and drove it away into the night. I sat there, gripping the cracked vinyl of the steering wheel, my knuckles white. There was no medical emergency. There was no canceled reservation. There was just a family dinner. A family dinner I wasn't invited to. A family I was good enough to finance, but not good enough to break bread with. I felt small, invisible, like a ghost haunting the edges of my own family's life, a specter they could only see when they needed something.
But the anger was still there, a hot coal glowing in the pit of my stomach. It burned away the self-pity, cauterizing the wound. Watching them through the glass, a cold, hard resolve formed in my heart. I wasn't just going to watch from the shadows anymore. I was going to get closer. I was going to listen. And what I heard would shatter the last remaining piece of my father's heart. I got out of my truck, my movements stiff and deliberate. I straightened my blazer, took a deep breath, and walked across the street. My legs felt heavy, like I was wading through wet cement, each step a monumental effort. I walked past the front entrance of the restaurant, avoiding the cheerful gaze of the valet, and found a spot near the large side window. It was a floor-to-ceiling pane of glass, and I was partially hidden from the street by a large, ornate planter filled with some kind of tropical plant. From there, I could see their table perfectly. They were seated at a large round booth in the center of the room, a prime spot. A waiter was already pouring wine, a deep, rich red, into 4 large glasses. I couldn't hear them at first, just the indistinct murmur of their voices and the clinking of glasses, a soundtrack of happy people enjoying an expensive meal. But I could see them. I saw the way Kevin leaned in to whisper something in Tiffany's ear, making her laugh, a tinkling sound I couldn't hear but could imagine. I saw the way his father-in-law, Preston, held his wine glass up to the light, swirling the contents with an air of practiced importance. They looked so comfortable, so entitled, so at home in their perfect little bubble of wealth and privilege. I needed to get inside. I couldn't just stand out here like a beggar at the feast. I walked to the front door, my heart pounding a frantic, desperate rhythm against my ribs. The hostess, a young woman with a practiced, impersonal smile, greeted me. "Good evening, sir. Do you have a reservation?" "No," I said, my voice hoarse and unfamiliar to my own ears. "But I was wondering if I could just sit at the bar for a drink. I'm waiting for someone." The lie came surprisingly easily. She glanced at my slightly too large blazer, her eyes passing over me without really seeing me. I was just another old man, not their usual clientele. "Of course, sir. The bar is to your right." I walked in, keeping my head down, and chose a stool at the far end of the bar. It was dark, tucked away, and from here I had a decent view of their table without being easily seen. I ordered a whiskey, neat. The bartender, a young man with intricate tattoos running up his arms, slid the glass to me without a word. I took a long, burning sip. It did little to calm the tremor in my hands. They were talking and laughing, their voices louder now, carrying across the restaurant. As I sat there nursing my drink, I started to pick up snippets of their conversation. They were talking about a trip to Europe they were planning for the spring, Paris and Rome. Then the conversation shifted. I heard Tiffany's mother, Vanessa, say my name. My entire body went rigid. I felt a chill spread through my chest. I strained to hear over the restaurant's ambient noise, leaning forward ever so slightly. "And honestly, I don't know how Tiffany puts up with it," Vanessa was saying, a disdainful look on her perfectly made-up face. "That dusty old house and his manners, the way he holds his fork like it's a shovel, it's positively Neanderthal." Preston chuckled, a dry rustling sound. "The man is a relic, darling, a blue-collared dinosaur from a bygone era. Kevin did the right thing by getting some distance. You can't have someone like that dragging down your brand." My brand. That's what I was to them. A liability to my son's brand. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, but it was what came next from my own son's mouth that truly broke me. It was Kevin's voice louder than the rest, full of a mocking bravado fueled by expensive wine.
"You guys won't believe the best part," he said, and the table leaned in conspiratorially, their faces gleaming in the candlelight. "The down payment for the new Beamer, it came from the old man himself." Preston raised his eyebrows in amusement. "He loaned it to you?" Kevin let out a short, ugly laugh that sounded nothing like the happy laugh of the boy I remembered. "Loaned? No. He gave it to me. I spun him some sob story about Tiffany having a massive medical emergency. He sold that old rust bucket Mustang he's so obsessed with and wired me the money the next day. Didn't even ask for a hospital bill. The man is so naive, it's almost sad." The whole table erupted in laughter. It was a cruel, sharp sound that cut right through me, silencing all the other noise in the restaurant. Tiffany, my daughter-in-law, the woman I had welcomed into my family, put her hand on his arm. "Oh, you're terrible," she giggled, but her eyes were shining with admiration for his cleverness. "But honestly, that car was an eyesore. You did him a favor. Now he has more room in that cluttered garage for his other junk." Then Kevin raised his wine glass high. "So I'd like to make a toast," he announced, his voice dripping with a thick, syrupy sarcasm. "To my father, the most generous, gullible man I know. His hard-earned retirement and his sentimental junk are making our lives just a little bit more comfortable. To Dad." They all raised their glasses, even Tiffany's parents. "To Dad," they echoed, and they drank. The whiskey burned my throat, but not as much as their words burned my soul. They weren't just disrespecting me, they were toasting to my stupidity, celebrating my betrayal. They were dancing on the grave of my love for them. At that moment, I knew I couldn't just walk away. I had to do something they would never, ever see coming. I threw a $20 bill on the bar, enough to cover the whiskey and then some, and walked out of the restaurant. I didn't look back at their table. I couldn't. If I had, I don't know what I would have done. The cool night air hit my face like a slap, but it couldn't quench the white-hot fire raging inside me. My hands were shaking, not with sadness or weakness anymore, but with pure, cold, diamond-hard fury. The drive home was a blur. I don't remember the traffic lights or the turns I made. All I could see were their laughing faces, their raised glasses. All I could hear was their mocking toast. To Dad! When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights. I walked into the dark living room and sank into my old armchair, the fabric worn smooth from years of use. The silence of the house pressed in on me, a physical weight. The grief I felt was sharp and sudden, like a death. It was the death of the son I thought I had. The boy who once passed me wrenches in the garage with grease on his nose, that boy was gone. He had been replaced by a stranger, a con man, who saw his own father as nothing more than a mark, a stepping stone on his path to a fancier life.
For an hour, maybe more, I sat there and let the anger wash over me, letting it burn away the pain. I could call him. I could drive over to his fancy condo and scream at him, tell him I knew everything. I could expose him for the liar and the cheat that he was. But what would that accomplish? He'd just lie more. He'd twist the story, make excuses, maybe even try to make me feel guilty for spying on him. No, a shouting match wasn't justice. It was just noise. I needed more. I needed to hit him where it would hurt. Not his feelings. It was painfully clear he didn't have any, but his wallet, his reputation, his carefully constructed world of lies. And then I thought of Frank Rizzo. Frank, who saw the world in black and white, right and wrong. Frank, who knew how to follow a trail. I picked up the phone and dialed his number. He answered on the second ring, his voice alert and professional, even though it was past 10 o'clock. "Rizzo." "Frank, it's Art," I said, my own voice sounding strange and brittle to my ears, like an old dried-out leaf. "Art? What's wrong? You sound terrible." I took a deep, shuddering breath. "You were right, Frank. You were right about everything." And then the dam broke. The words came pouring out in a torrent. The stakeout, the new BMW, the dinner at the Gilded Steer, the overheard conversation, the toast to my stupidity. I told him every last soul-crushing detail, my voice shaking with a rage I hadn't known I was capable of. Frank listened without a single interruption. He let me vent, let me get it all out. When I was finished, my throat raw,
There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his sharp detective's mind. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was as hard and cold as a block of steel in January. That's lower than a snake's belly in a wagon rut, he said, his old cop phrasing coming out, a sign that he was truly angry. Art, I'm so sorry you had to hear that. No father should ever have to go through that kind of betrayal. I don't want pity, Frank, I said, my voice hardening, the tremor gone. I want justice. He didn't just take my money, he took my dignity. He laughed at me. I want to make him pay. I want to bring his whole world crashing down around him. Good, Frank said, a new energy, a sense of purpose in his voice. Because sitting around feeling sorry for yourself isn't your style. Now listen to me. This isn't just a family squabble anymore. This is criminal. If he took money from you under false pretenses for the car, that's fraud. But my gut tells me this is just the tip of the iceberg. People who operate like this, who have this level of contempt for others, they don't just do it once. They leave a trail of slime everywhere they go. What do you mean? I mean, if he's this brazen, I'd be willing to bet my pension he's cutting corners somewhere else. Taxes, credit, something. Let me do what I do, Art. Let me dig. Don't call him. Don't text him. Act like nothing happened. Give me a day or two. Let's see how deep this rabbit hole goes. A sliver of hope, sharp and bright, cut through my despair. Frank was on my side. This wasn't just me, a broken-hearted old man, against my manipulative son anymore. This was an alliance with justice. The next evening, Frank called me back. His voice was grim. He said, Art, you need to sit down. It's worse than we thought. Much, much worse. I sank into my armchair, the phone pressed hard against my ear, my knuckles white. What did you find, Frank? It's not just the car, Art. It's so much bigger, so much more calculated than we thought. I started with a simple credit check on you, just on a hunch. Your credit score, it's taken a nosedive in the last year. It's dropped almost 150 points. What? How is that possible? I stammered. I pay all my bills on time. I don't have any debt. Carol and I made sure to pay off the house before I retired. You do now, Frank. And he could hear him shuffling papers on his desk. There are 3 outstanding personal loans under your name taken out from 3 different online lenders over the last 18 months, totaling just over $30,000. The room tilted. I felt a wave of dizziness, and I had to grip the arms of my chair to steady myself. I've never borrowed that much money in my entire life. That's impossible, Frank. I never took out any loans. It has to be a mistake. Identity theft. It was identity theft, Art, but the thief had a key to the house. Remember, about 2 years ago, Kevin came to you with a thick stack of papers, said they were for his new job's HR department, something about designating you as an emergency contact and adding you to some family benefits plan. I remembered it vaguely. It was a Saturday afternoon. Kevin had been in a hurry, tapping his foot impatiently. Just sign at the bottom of the highlighted pages, Dad. It's all standard corporate stuff. He pushed a pen into my hand. I trusted him. I'd signed where he told me to, without reading the fine print. He was my son, my own son. How could I not trust him? It wasn't standard stuff, Art, he said, his voice laced with a cold anger that mirrored my own. Buried in that stack of corporate jargon was a durable power of attorney, a legal document. It gave him the right to make financial decisions on your behalf, to open accounts, to take out loans. He tricked you into signing over your financial life, my friend. He's been taking out loans in your name and having the statements and correspondence sent to a P.O. box he opened. He's likely making the minimum payments to keep them from defaulting and raising red flags, but your debt-to-income ratio is completely shot. I felt sick. A wave of nausea washed over me, and I thought I might throw up. Power of attorney. He planned this. This wasn't a one-time desperate act of greed. This was a calculated, long-term scheme to systematically defraud his own father. But wait! And Frank said, and his voice got even tighter, even angrier. It gets worse. I had a friend of mine inside the IRS, a guy who owes me a big favor, run a preliminary off-the-books check on Kevin's filings. For the last 5 years, Kevin has been claiming you as a dependent on his tax returns. A dependent? But he doesn't support me. I support him, I exclaimed in voice rising in disbelief. Oh, it's better than that, Art. He's been filing a Form 2441 for child and dependent care expenses. He's been claiming he pays for full-time in-home nursing care for his frail, elderly father who is unable to care for himself. He's been writing off thousands upon thousands of dollars a year in completely fictitious medical expenses. He's not just defrauding Hill, he's committing federal tax fraud, a serious felony, and he's using your good name to do it.
I couldn't speak. I was choking on the sheer scales of his betrayal, the absolute audacity of his crimes. He hadn't just seen me as a gullible old man. He'd seen me as an asset, a name on a form he could exploit for financial gain. He was a parasite, a leech, and I had been his host for years without even knowing it. He wasn't just a bad son, he was a criminal. My son was a criminal. The despair I felt was quickly being replaced by something else, something cold and hard and clear. A cold, hard resolve. This wasn't about a broken heart anymore. This was about stopping him. This was about protecting what little I had left of my life and my dignity. My son, I finally whispered, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. He hadn't just lied to me. He had systematically dismantled my financial life and my good name for his own selfish gain. Frank and I met the next morning at the diner. He laid out the evidence, a damning portfolio of my son's deceit. His eyes were serious. We can report him, Art. We have enough evidence here to bring his whole world crashing down. The decision was mine, and mine alone. I met Frank at the Oak Haven diner the next morning. He had the thick folder with him. He slid it across the table, and I opened it. Inside was the evidence, laid out in cold, hard black and white. Copies of the fraudulent loan agreements with my forged-looking signature, printouts of Kevin's suspicious tax filings with the outrageous claims for my care, a timeline of the bank transfers, the sale of the Mustang, the purchase of the BMW. Seeing it all together, the full scope of his calculated betrayal solidified my resolve into something unbreakable. There was no going back. There was no room for doubt. So, what's the plan? I asked, my voice steady for the first time in days. We go to the police? The IRS? Frank took a long sip of his coffee, his eyes thoughtful. We could, and we will, eventually, but a police report is just paperwork. It's slow, it's impersonal, it happens behind closed doors. You want justice, Art, and justice sometimes needs a little stagecraft. It needs a spotlight. He leaned forward, a glint in his eye that I hadn't seen since his days on the force, the look of a hunter closing in on his prey. He humiliated you. He and his wife and her snobbish parents, they laughed at you in that fancy restaurant. They toasted to your stupidity. I think it's only fitting that we bring him down in the very same place. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It wasn't a happy smile, but it was a satisfying one. It was perfect. It was poetic. The gilded steer. Exactly, Frank said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. We need to get him there, with Tiffany. We need to get them comfortable, feeling safe, feeling superior. We need to let their greed lead them right into the trap. And then when they're at their most arrogant, we lower the boom. The plan was simple, but it was brilliant. It was cruel, but it was just. I was the bait. My supposed gullibility, the very thing he had mocked, was now the hook. That afternoon, I sat in my armchair for a long time, the phone heavy in my hand. I had to make the hardest, most dishonest call of my life. I had to become an actor. I had to play the part of the loving, clueless father one last time. I practiced the words in my head, coaching myself to sound cheerful, to sound excited, to sound like the fool he believed me to be. I dialed his number.
he answered on the third ring, his voice cautious, wary. "Dad, is everything okay?" "Everything's great, son. Better than great, actually. You are not going to believe the news I got today." "What is it?" he asked, and I could hear a flicker of greedy interest in his voice. I knew what he was thinking. More money. "Well, you know Carol's old life insurance policy? The small one I thought was worthless. Just a burial policy. My lawyer just called. Turns out there was some kind of investment clause in it that none of us knew about. And it's matured. It's a pretty substantial amount, Kevin. A real windfall." I let that lie hang in the air for a moment, a juicy worm on a hook. I could almost hear the gears of greed turning in his head. "Wow, Dad, that's incredible," he said, now his voice dripping with a thick, manufactured warmth. "I'm so happy for you. You deserve it." "Well, I want to share the good news. I want to celebrate. Let's finally have that family dinner. My treat. Let's go to that fancy place you like, the Gilded Steer, this Friday. I want you and Tiffany there. I've been doing some thinking, and I want to talk about plans for the future." The hook was set. The phrase, "plans for the future," was the final, irresistible tug on the line. He thought he was walking into a celebration. He had no idea he was walking into a reckoning. The reservation was made. The players were set. The stage was now ready for the final, devastating act. Friday night arrived with a cold, clear sky, the stars looking like chips of ice. I put on the same navy blazer, the same gray slacks. Tonight, these clothes weren't a symbol of my grief or my simple life. They were my uniform. I was a soldier going into battle, and this was my dress uniform. I arrived at the Gilded Steer a half hour early, at 7 p.m. The place was already buzzing with the low hum of expensive conversation and the clinking of heavy silverware. Frank was already there, as promised, sitting at a small table near the back with two other men. They were all dressed in business casual, looking like any other group of colleagues out for a Friday night dinner. But I recognized the look in their eyes. It was the calm, watchful, patient gaze of law enforcement. One was a detective from the Oak Haven PD's Financial Crimes Unit. The other was a special agent from the IRS's Criminal Investigation Division. Frank had pulled out all the stops. He gave me a subtle, almost imperceptible nod as I passed their table. I was shown to our table, a large, prominent booth right in the center of the dining room. I had specifically requested it when I made the reservation. I wanted a front row seat, and I wanted an audience for the final act of this tragedy.
At 7:30 on the dot, Kevin and Tiffany arrived. They were beaming, practically glowing with avarice and anticipation. Tiffany was wearing a glittering silver dress that probably cost a fortune, and Kevin had the confident, entitled swagger of a man who believes he's about to hit the jackpot. "Dad!" Kevin said, pulling me into an awkward one-armed hug that was all for show. "You look great! This is a great table, right in the middle of everything." "Mr. Miller, it's so wonderful to see you," Tiffany cooed, kissing the air beside my cheek, her expensive perfume enveloping me in a cloud of phoniness. "We are just so thrilled about your good news. You so deserve a little luck." Sit, I said, my voice surprisingly calm and even. My heart was a steady, heavy drumbeat in my chest. "Let's order some drinks, the best they have." We ordered a bottle of champagne, the most expensive one on the menu. Let him spend my money, I thought. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. They couldn't stop talking about the windfall. They were like sharks that had smelled blood in the water. They asked questions about the lawyer, the policy, the exact amount. I was vague, batting away their inquiries with a mysterious smile. "All in good time," I said, raising my glass. "Tonight is for celebrating new beginnings." They were practically salivating. They started talking about what we could do with the money,
a new sunroom for my house so I could enjoy my garden in the winter, a trip for all of us to Hawaii, a real family vacation. It was a masterful performance of filial devotion. They played the part of the loving, caring children perfectly, their eyes gleaming with dollar signs. "You know, Dad," Kevin said, placing his hand over mine on the table. His hand was soft and smooth, not like mine. It took all my willpower not to flinch, not to pull my hand away from his predatory touch. "You know, Dad," Kevin said, placing his hand over mine on the table. His hand was soft and smooth, not like mine. It took all my willpower not to flinch, not to pull my hand away from his predatory touch. "I'm so glad we're doing this. I feel like we've been a bit distant lately. I want to change that. After all, family is the most important thing in the world." The hypocrisy was so thick I could have cut it with a steak knife. This man, my son, who had sold my memories, stolen my identity, and laughed at my expense with his wife and her family, was now lecturing me on the importance of family. The champagne arrived. The waiter popped the cork with a flourish and filled our crystal flutes. Kevin picked up his glass, his smile wide and triumphant. He said, "A toast," he said, his voice full of false sincerity, "to family, to new beginnings, and most of all, to you, Dad. May your future be as bright and prosperous as you deserve." Tiffany and I raised our glasses. I looked my son dead in the eye, a cold, unreadable smile playing on my lips. "I'll drink to that," I said, my voice quiet but clear, "and to endings." Just as our glasses clinked, a sound that seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet restaurant, I saw Frank stand up from his table and begin to walk toward us. The show was about to begin. Frank approached our table with a calm, deliberate pace that I knew well. It was the walk of a man in complete control, the walk of a detective approaching a suspect who didn't yet know the game was over. He wasn't smiling. Kevin looked up, his own triumphant smile faltering as he saw the grim expression on Frank's face. "Frank, what are you doing here?" he asked, a note of confusion and annoyance in his voice. He looked from Frank to me, a flicker of suspicion finally dawning in his eyes. Frank didn't answer him. He looked at me, a silent question in his eyes, and I gave him the slightest of nods. Then he pulled out a chair from a nearby empty table and sat down uninvited. He placed a thick manila folder on the crisp white tablecloth with a soft, final thud that seemed to reverberate through the room. The two men who had been with him were now standing a few feet away, their arms crossed, their gazes fixed on Kevin and Tiffany. "Kevin Miller, Tiffany Miller," Frank said, his voice low but carrying with an authority that cut through the restaurant's ambient chatter. Tiffany let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. "A private investigator? Is this some kind of joke, Art?" she asked me, her smile now a brittle, cracking facade. "I'm not laughing, Tiffany," I said, meeting her panicked gaze over the rim of my glass. Kevin's face had gone pale, the color draining away to a pasty, sickly white. "What is this about, Frank? If this is about some money my dad loaned me, it's a family matter. It's a misunderstanding." "This is more than a loan, Kevin," Frank said, his voice as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. He opened the folder. "This is about fraud, specifically bank fraud, insurance fraud, and federal tax fraud." He slid a document across the table. It was a copy of the durable power of attorney I had so foolishly signed. "Recognize this? You used it to fraudulently take out $30,000 in personal loans in your father's name. That's bank fraud." He slid another paper over, landing it right next to Tiffany's plate. "And this? This is a bill of sale for a 1968 Ford Mustang. You told your father you needed the money for your wife's emergency medical treatment. But Tiffany, my associate, checked with your insurance provider and the local hospitals. You haven't had so much as a doctor's visit for a cold in the last year. That's fraud by deception, a felony." Tiffany gasped. her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a ghost in a designer dress. And my personal favorite are these, Frank continued, his voice dripping with contempt he didn't bother to hide. He fanned out copies of their tax returns on the table like a losing poker hand. Your tax filings for the past 5 years, in which you claim thousands of dollars in dependent care for your frail father, whom you claimed was incapable of self-care. You've been cheating the government and using your own dad as a shield to do it. The entire restaurant was silent now. Every eye was on our table. Diners had put down their forks. Waiters stood frozen, trays in hand. We were the center of a very public, very ugly universe. Kevin stared at the papers, his jaw slack, his arrogant composure completely shattered. He looked like a cornered, desperate animal. He turned to me, his eyes wild with a mixture of fear and a new, dawning hatred. You did this? You set me up? Your own son? I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. You built this prison yourself, son. You laid every brick with every lie you told. I just held the door open for you. At that moment, the other 2 men stepped forward. One of them opened his jacket to reveal a badge clipped to his belt. Kevin Miller, Tiffany Miller, he said, his voice calm and official. You're under arrest for suspicion of fraud and grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law.
Tiffany immediately burst into tears, a loud theatrical wail of self-preservation. "It was him!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at her husband, her partner in crime. "It was all his idea. I didn't know about the loans. I just signed the tax forms where he told me to. I swear." Kevin stared at her, his face a mask of utter disbelief and betrayal. "You liar," he snarled, his voice a vicious whisper that everyone could hear. "The BMW was your idea. You said my old truck was embarrassing. You were the one who found the power of attorney forms online. You pushed me to do all of this." Their perfect facade, their life of lies, their partnership in deceit crumbled into dust right there in the middle of the expensive restaurant for all the world to see. The sight of my son and his wife being led out of the Gilded Steer in handcuffs is something that will be burned into my memory forever. The flashing lights of the police cars outside painted the shocked faces of the other diners in strobing blues and reds. The whispers started immediately, a wave of speculation and judgment rippling through the room. I saw a woman at a nearby table holding up her phone, her screen aimed directly at us, no doubt recording the whole humiliating spectacle for her social media followers. In a few hours, my family's dirty laundry would be all over the internet, a piece of viral content for strangers to gawk at. Frank stayed with me. The detective and the IRS agent were professional and discreet. They took my initial statement right there at the table, their questions polite but firm. I answered them honestly, my voice flat and detached, as if I were describing events that had happened to someone else. When they were done, they gave me their cards and told me they would be in touch. They left, and the restaurant manager, a young man with a deeply pained expression and sweat beading on his forehead, came over to our table. Sir, Mr. Miller, I'm so terribly sorry for this disruption. Your meal is on the house, of course. Please, is there anything at all we can do?" I looked at the full, untouched plates of expensive steak getting cold on the table, the half-empty bottle of fizzing champagne. My appetite was gone, probably for good. "Just the check for the drinks we had," I said, my voice sounding tired to my own ears. "And a box for the food. I'll give it to a homeless man on the way home. No sense in it going to waste." The manager just nodded, looking relieved to have a simple, concrete task to perform. He scurried away. Frank and I sat in silence for a few minutes. The restaurant was slowly, awkwardly, trying to return to normal, but the energy had irrevocably shifted. The air was thick with our drama. We were the main event, and now that the show is over, no one knew what to do. "You okay, Art?" Frank finally asked, his voice gentle, pulling me from my thoughts.
I don't know what I am, I answered honestly, looking at the wreckage on the table. I thought I'd feel triumphant, vindicated, happy even. I thought revenge was supposed to be sweet, but it just tastes bitter. It just tastes like ash in my mouth. I just feel empty. I looked across the table at the two empty chairs, the crumpled linen napkin Tiffany had dropped in her haste, the champagne glass Kevin had toasted with just moments before he was arrested. He's my son, Frank. My boy. How did it come to this? Where did I go wrong? Frank sighed, a deep, weary sound. He ran a hand over his tired face. Some people are just born with a hole in their soul, Art, and they spend their whole lives trying to fill it with things. Money, cars, status, and they don't care who they have to hurt or use to get them. It's not your fault. You loved him. That's what a father is supposed to do. You gave him a good heart. He chose not to use it. My love made me blind, I said bitterly, the words tearing at my throat. No, Frank corrected me, his voice firm. Your love made you a target. There's a big difference. We left the restaurant, the heavy box of fancy food feeling ridiculously out of place in my hands. The night air was cold, and I shivered, though it wasn't from the temperature. We walked in silence for a block, the city lights seeming too bright, too cheerful, too oblivious to the tragedy that had just unfolded. I had won. I had gotten my revenge. But as I looked at the wreckage of my family, I had to ask myself, at what cost? What did I truly gain from all of this, besides a deeper, more profound, and more permanent sense of loss? Instead of going home to my empty house, I found myself driving toward the old part of town, away from the glittering lights and trendy restaurants. You mind if we make a stop? I asked, my voice still hoarse. He just nodded, understanding I wasn't ready to be alone. I pulled up in front of a dimly lit brick building with a faded neon sign that read, "The Piston and Pint." It was an old hunt for auto workers from the plant, a place with worn wooden floors sticky with decades of spilled beer, the comforting smell of roasted peanuts, and honest, straightforward people. It was my kind of place. We slid into a booth in the back corner, away from the small crowd at the bar. The jukebox was playing some old Bob Seger, Against the Wind. It felt right. It felt real. The waitress, a woman about my age with a kind, tired face, came over. "2 drafts of whatever's local," I said. She nodded and was back in a minute with 2 heavy, chilled mugs of beer. We drank in silence for a while. The familiar sounds of the bar, the clack of pool balls, the low murmur of conversation, the classic rock on the jukebox. A comforting blanket. It was the opposite of the tense, artificial quiet of the Gilded Steer. "You know," Frank said finally after a long pull from his beer, "when I was a rookie cop, fresh out of the academy, my training officer told me something I never forgot. He was an old, grizzled sergeant who had seen it all. He said, 'Rizzo, there are 2 kinds of families in this world. The one you're born with and the one you build. Don't ever be afraid to fire someone from the first one if they're trying to burn down the second one.'" I looked at him, my old friend, my brother in all but blood, the one who had been there when I married Carol, the one who had helped me carry her casket on a cold November day, the one who had just stood by me as I faced the ugliest truth of my life. He hadn't judged me for being a fool. He hadn't said, "I told you so," even though he had every right to. He had just shown up. He had helped me fight back.
"You build a pretty good family, Frank," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. He just shrugged, but a small, genuine smile touched his lips. "It's a two-way street, Art. You've bailed me out of more than one jam in your day. Remember that time my transmission went out on the highway on the way to my daughter's dance recital? I was stranded." I chuckled, the first genuine, unforced laugh I'd had in weeks. The memory was so clear. "I remember you standing on the side of I-94 in your Sunday best, looking like you were about to cry into your tie." You showed up with your toolbox in 20 minutes and had me back on the road, he said, raising his mug. That's family, showing up. We sat there for hours, long after the first beer was gone, talking about old times, about our wives, about the aches and pains of getting older, about everything and nothing. We didn't talk much more about Kevin. We didn't need to. The wound was too fresh, too raw. But sitting there in that unpretentious bar with a friend who understood without needing an explanation, I felt that vast, crushing emptiness inside me begin to shrink. It was still there, a hole where my son used to be, but it wasn't all-consuming anymore. Frank was right. Family wasn't just blood. It wasn't an obligation you were born into. It was a choice. It was loyalty. It was respect. It was showing up with your toolbox when a friend was broken down on the side of the road. The road ahead of me was uncertain, a path I never chose. But for the first time in a long, long time, I knew I wouldn't be walking it alone. The weeks that followed were a surreal blur of legal proceedings. Kevin and Tiffany, facing a mountain of irrefutable evidence, took a plea deal to avoid a messy public trial. They avoided jail time, a fact that initially stung, but the consequences were severe and life-altering. They were sentenced to 5 years of probation. They were ordered to pay full restitution to me for the car and the loans, and a mountain of back taxes with heavy penalties to the IRS. They each had to complete 2,000 hours of community service. Their assets were frozen and liquidated. The new BMW was repossessed. Their carefully crafted world of illusion and luxury had been shattered into a million pieces. I heard through the grapevine from Dave Hartzell that they lost their fancy condo and had to move into a small, rundown apartment on the other side of town. I never spoke to them directly again. Their lawyers sent me cashier's checks every month, a cold, impersonal reminder of the whole ugly affair. The first check felt like a small victory. The second felt like a sad obligation. By the third, it was just a painful reminder of a debt that could never truly be repaid. One Saturday morning, about a month after the arrest, I woke up and walked into my garage. The empty space where the Mustang used to be felt like a missing tooth in a familiar smile. For weeks, I had avoided this place. It was too full of ghosts, too full of painful memories of a boy who no longer existed, a dream that had died. But that morning, something had shifted inside me. The raw anger had cooled, leaving behind a quiet sense of resolve. I wasn't going to let him take this from me too. This garage was my space. These tools were an extension of my hands. This was where I had always made sense of the world. I spent the whole day cleaning. I swept the concrete floors, wiped down the dusty shelves, and organized my wrenches, sockets, and screwdrivers with a meticulousness I hadn't felt in years. As I worked, my hands busy, my mind began to clear. An idea began to form, a crazy, wonderful idea that felt like the first ray of sunshine after a long, dark storm. The next week, I started searching online, scrolling through listings on Craigslist and classic car forums. I wasn't looking for a perfectly restored show car. I was looking for a project. I was looking for something broken, something neglected, something that needed a second chance. I was looking for a reflection of myself. 2 weeks later, I found it. A 1967 Mustang Fastback, the same model year as Carol's favorite car, sitting in a barn 100 miles away in farm country. Its Highland green paint was faded and peeling, its 289 engine was seized solid, and its interior had been a home for a family of mice for the better part of a decade. It was perfect. The day I had it towed to my house on a flatbed, Mrs. Gable came over from next door carrying a still warm apple pie. "Are starting a new project, Arthur?" she asked, a knowing, gentle smile on her face. "A new lease on life, Eleanor." And I was surprised to find I was unable to stop grinning. That evening, I stood in my garage, a beer in my hand, looking at the rusted, beautiful shell of my new car. It was a mess. It would take years of hard work and patience to bring it back to life. But as I laid my hand on its cold, dusty hood, I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt a surge of purpose, a feeling I thought I had lost forever. I was going to rebuild this car, piece by painstaking piece, not for a memory of a son I once had, but for myself,
for the joy of creation, for the simple, profound satisfaction of taking something broken and making it whole again. The smell of oil and steel filled the air again. It was the smell of home, the smell of a new beginning. My old life, the one defined by my role as a father, was over, but my new one, the one defined by me, Arthur Miller, was just getting started. Rebuilding that car has been a slow process. It's not a race. Some days I spend hours in the garage, meticulously cleaning a single part, sanding away decades of rust to find the good metal underneath. Other days, I just sit in my old wooden chair with a cup of coffee and look at it, planning the next step, dreaming of the day I'll turn the key and hear that engine roar back to life. It's teaching me patience again. It's teaching me that you can't fix everything overnight, especially the things that are broken on the inside. The legal battle is over, and the restitution checks come every month like clockwork. I don't even look at them anymore. I just deposit them into a separate account. Maybe one day I'll use the money to take a trip, maybe even drive this new Mustang to California, a trip for myself this time. But the emotional fallout, that's a longer-term project. There will always be a scar where my son used to be, but I'm learning that scars aren't ugly. They're a sign of healing, proof that you survived something that tried to break you. My son's betrayal nearly did break me. It pushed me into the darkest corners of grief, shame, and anger. But in the end, in a strange and painful way, it also set me free. It forced me to see that I was clinging to the ghost of a relationship, sacrificing my own dignity and financial security for a son who had none of his own. It taught me that my value as a person isn't defined by my role as a father, but by my own character, my own integrity, and my own resilience. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to let go of a toxic connection, even if it's your own blood. Protecting your peace and your self-respect is not selfish. It's necessary for survival. My story had a painful but necessary ending. It taught me that real family is about respect, loyalty, and showing up, not just about a shared last name. And now I want to turn it over to you. Have you ever faced a deep betrayal from someone you were supposed to be able to trust with your life? A family member, a close friend? How did you find the strength to move forward, to rebuild, to find your own peace in the aftermath? Please, if you feel comfortable, share a piece of your story in the comments below. Reading your experiences helps me, and it helps everyone in this community feel a little less alone on this journey. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing for more stories like this one. Your support truly means the world. Be good to yourselves, and more importantly, be good to the people who are good to you.